Boris Johnson served as Foreign Secretary from 2016 until 2018. As a member of Theresa May's government, Johnson was appointed Foreign Secretary on July 13, 2016, shortly after May became Prime Minister following the resignation of David Cameron. Analysts saw the appointment as a tactic to weaken Johnson politically. The new positions of Brexit Secretary and International Trade Secretary left the Foreign Secretary as a figurehead with few powers. When Theresa May became Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister, she named Johnson her Foreign Secretary. Johnson maintained his seat in the House of Commons in the snap election called by May for June 2017, and he remained Foreign Secretary when May reshuffled her cabinet after the Conservatives lost their legislative majority in that election and formed a minority government. In April 2018, Johnson defended May's decision to join the United States and France in the strategic airstrikes that were undertaken against the regime of Syrian Bashar al-Assad in response to evidence that it had again used chemical weapons on its own people. Opposition parties were critical of the May government's use of force without having first sought approval from Parliament. Johnson himself was taken to task in some quarters for statements he had made regarding an incident in March 2018 in which a former Russian intelligence officer who had acted as a double agent for Britain was found unconscious with his daughter in Salisbury, England. Investigators believed that the pair had been exposed to a Novichok, a complex nerve agent that had been developed by the Soviets, but Johnson was accused of misleading the public by saying that Britain's top military laboratory had determined with certainty that the Novichok used in the attack had come from Russia. The Defense Science and Technology Laboratory actually had only identified the substance as a Novichok. Nonetheless, the British government was confident enough of the likelihood of Russian complicity in the attack that it expelled nearly 24 Russian intelligence operatives who had been working in Britain under diplomatic cover. In May 2018, Johnson was the target of a prank also thought to have been perpetrated by Russia when a recording was made of a telephone conversation between him and a pair of individuals, one of whom fooled Johnson by pretending to be the new Prime Minister of Armenia. While all these events unfolded, Johnson remained a persistent advocate of hard Brexit as May's government struggled to formulate the details of its exit strategy for its negotiations with the EU. Johnson publicly, and not always tactfully, cautioned May to not relinquish British autonomy in pursuit of maintaining close economic involvement in the common market. When May summoned her cabinet to Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, on July 6, 2018, to try to reach a nuts and bolts consensus on its Brexit plan, Johnson reportedly was crudely obstinate. Nonetheless, by the gathering's end, he seemed to have joined the other cabinet members in support of May's softer approach to Brexit. However, after Brexit Secretary David Davis resigned on July 8, saying that he could not continue as Britain's chief negotiator with the EU because May was giving too much away, too easily, Johnson followed suit the next day, tendering his resignation as Foreign Secretary. In his letter of resignation, Johnson wrote in part, "It is more than 2 years since the British people voted to leave the European Union on an unambiguous and categorical promise that if they did so they would be taking back control of their democracy. They were told that they would be able to manage their own immigration policy, repatriate the sums of UK cash currently spent by the EU, and, above all, that they would be able to pass laws independently and in the interests of the people of this country. That dream is dying, suffocated by needless self-doubt." Johnson's appointment ensured he would often be out of the country and unable to organize and mobilise backbenchers against her, while forcing him to take responsibility for problems caused by withdrawing from the EU. He held the post until he resigned on July 9, 2018 in protest at the Chequers Plan and May's approach to Brexit, and was succeeded by Jeremy Hunt. Notable events of his tenure included the response to the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, the imprisonment of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and support for the Saudi Arabian led intervention in Yemen. After Theresa May became leader of the Conservative and Prime Minister, Johnson was appointed as Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs on July 13, 2016. Johnson's appointment was criticized by some journalists and foreign politicians due to his history of controversial statements about other countries and their leaders. Former Prime Minister of Sweden Carl Bildt said, "I wish it was a joke," and French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault stated, "I am not at all worried about Boris Johnson, but, during the campaign he lied a lot to the British people and now it is he who has his back against the wall as the UK tries to negotiate its future relationship with EU." Conversely, former Prime Minister of Australia Tony Abbott welcomed the appointment and called him a friend of Australia. A senior official in the US government suggested that Johnson's appointment would push the US further towards ties with Germany at the expense of the special relationship with the UK. Several analysts described the appointment as a possible tactic by May to weaken Johnson politically. The new positions of Brexit Secretary and International Trade Secretary leave the Foreign Secretary as a figurehead with few powers, and the appointment would ensure that Johnson would often be out of the country and unable to organize a rebel coalition, while also forcing him to take responsibility for any problems caused by withdrawing from the EU. In August 2016, May called on feuding ministers Johnson and Liam Fox to stop playing games after Fox wrote to Johnson saying that British trade could not flourish whilst future policy responsibility remained in Johnson's department. His recorded message supporting Change Britain was perceived by The Guardian as putting pressure on May to speed up the exit process, though the newspaper also recorded the anger of former Health Minister Anna Soubry at the absence of the central £350m a week bonanza for the NHS pledge, a pledge she had previously described as a lie. In an article critical of Leave campaign figures, which noted his video and his lack of support for May, The Washington Post called him bombastic. Johnson supported the Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen and refused to block UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia, saying there is no clear evidence of breaches of international humanitarian law by Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. In September 2016, he was accused of blocking the UN inquiry into Saudi war crimes in Yemen. Johnson's first visit to Turkey as Foreign Secretary was somewhat tense due to his having won Douglas Murray's poetry competition about the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, 4 months earlier. When questioned by a journalist whether he would apologize for the poem, which was published by The Spectator, Johnson dismissed the matter as trivia. Johnson pledged to help Turkey join the European Union in any way possible and expressed Britain's continued support for the elected Turkish government. Upon meeting with Australian Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop in late September 2016, Johnson reiterated his support for negotiating increased visa access between the United Kingdom and Australia, declaring it odd that Australians struggled harder to settle in Britain than European nations such as Slovakia. In January 2017, the former government minister Lord Wallace of Saltaire said that Johnson's work on Brexit had left civil servants in despair and that he was alienating other EU foreign ministers. The Foreign Office defended Johnson. In December 2016, at the Med2 conference in Rome, Johnson said, "There are politicians who are twisting and abusing religion and different strains of the same religion in order to further their own political objectives. That's one of the biggest political problems in the whole region. That's why you've got the Saudis, Iran, everybody, moving in and puppeteering and playing proxy wars." These comments were interpreted as a diplomatic gaffe in Britain, as Saudi Arabia is an ally of Britain and the biggest buyer of British arms. British Prime Minister Theresa May said that the foreign minister's comments did not represent the government's view. Following the 2017 general election, Johnson denied media reports that he intended to challenge Theresa May for leadership of the Conservative Party. He further denied this media speculation on September 16, 2017 as well, insisting on his Twitter page that he was all behind Theresa for a glorious Brexit. In August 2017, Rachel Sylvester reported in The Times that Johnson was ineffective and incoherent on major issues like North Korea and Qatar, whilst on Brexit, he appeared to have no idea of what was required. His rhetoric seemed to suggest that the UK could dictate the terms as if it was some kind of public school game rather than a negotiation on which the future of the nation depends. Sylvester believed that both European ministers and White House officials regard him as a joke. This follows a Today program interview in June on the Queen's speech where, asked about the government's answer to the burning injustices, highlighted by Theresa May when she became Prime Minister, he showed a lack of understanding of the issues sufficiently serious to require prompting by Eddie Mayer. In an op-ed published in the Daily Telegraph in September 2017, Johnson reiterated that the UK would regain control of £350 million a week after Brexit, saying it would be fine thing if much of the money went on the NHS. He was subsequently criticised by cabinet colleagues for reviving the assertion, and was accused of clear misuse of official statistics by the chair of the UK Statistics Authority, Sir David Norgrove. The authority rejected the suggestion that it was quibbling over newspaper headlines and not Johnson's actual words. A few days later, on September 19, the former Chancellor Kenneth Clarke said that Johnson would have been sacked if British politics were in a more straightforward period. Immediately ahead of the party conference, noting a second Johnson speech setting out terms for Brexit even before determination by the cabinet, Ruth Davidson called for serious people to take over his role, criticised his over-optimism and predicted that Britain would look very much like it looks now after the transitional period. On February 27, 2018, in a leaked letter to Theresa May, Johnson suggested that Northern Ireland may have to accept border controls after Brexit and that it would not seriously affect trade, having initially said a hard border would be unthinkable. February 28, 2018, he turned again, stating he would publish his 18-page letter in full online as he recommitted to ruling out a hard border after Britain left the EU. Johnson caused controversy on a number of occasions. Whilst visiting a temple in Myanmar, formerly Burma, the British ambassador prevented him from reciting lines from Rudyard Kipling's poem The Road to Mandalay, stopping him a verse before a line which refers to the Buddha as a bloomin' idol made o' mud. The ambassador described the colonial-era poem as not appropriate. While speaking at the 2017 Conservative Party conference, Johnson caused upset by remarking that the Libyan city Sirte, which had been the site of sustained conflict between the so-called Islamic State and the Libyan government of national accord, could be the new Dubai, adding, "All they have to do is clear the dead bodies away." Following his remarks, several Tory MPs called for his sacking. According to The Economist, as Foreign Secretary, Johnson is ridiculed abroad and disliked in the Foreign Office. Writing in the New Statesman, Martin Fletcher suggested that Johnson is harming British interests abroad. Fletcher wrote that a senior European diplomat based in London said that Johnson was not taken seriously as a foreign policy actor and was damaging British interests. He suggested that 3/5 of the 27 EU ambassadors in London quite like Johnson but consider him ill-suited to the job, while the remaining 2/5 positively dislike him. My interlocutors are, of course, experts in their field and fully paid-up members of the metropolitan elite. I, too, am dismayed by the harm that Johnson is doing to my country and appalled by the possibility of him becoming Prime Minister. On November 1, 2017, Johnson told the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, a British citizen serving a 5-year prison sentence in Iran after being arrested on holiday on suspicion of training BBC Persian employees, had been simply teaching people journalism. 3 days later, the High Council for Human Rights in Iran doubled Zaghari-Ratcliffe's sentence, using Johnson's words as evidence against her. Her family, her employer, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, and fellow politicians including Zaghari-Ratcliffe's MP Tulip Siddiq, Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry and former Conservative Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind all called on Johnson to retract his words. Johnson insisted that he had been misquoted, and that nothing he had said had justified Zaghari-Ratcliffe's sentence. In December 2017, Johnson told the Sunday Times newspaper, "I was reading Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. It was obvious to me that Athens and its democracy, its openness, its culture and civilization was the analog of the United States and the West. Russia for me was closed, nasty, militaristic and anti-democratic, like Sparta. In response to the Turkish invasion of northern Syria aimed at ousting Uzbek Syrian Kurds from the enclave of Afrin, Johnson said, watching developments in Afrin closely. Turkey is right to want to keep its borders secure. In March 2018, a Russian former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia were poisoned in Salisbury, England, with a Novichok nerve agent. Most politicians believed that the Russian government was behind the attack. In the aftermath of the incident, Johnson provoked controversy when he compared Vladimir Putin's hosting of the World Cup in Russia to Adolf Hitler's hosting of the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. On March 20, 2018, Johnson said in an interview with Deutsche Welle that scientists from the Porton Down laboratory were absolutely categorical about the Russian origin of the substance used. "I mean, I asked the guy myself," Johnson said. "I said, 'Are you sure?' And he said, 'There's no doubt.' So we have very little alternative but to take the action that we have taken." 53. On April 3, 2018, Gary Aitkenhead, the chief executive of the government's Defense Science and Technology Laboratory, DSTL, at Porton Down responsible for testing the substance involved in the case, said that they had been unable to verify the precise source of the Novichok nerve agent. Labour MP Chris Williamson tweeted that Johnson had just lied to justify our country's foreign policy. In March 2018, Johnson was reprimanded by Commons Speaker John Bercow for using what he called sexist language. Bercow intervened after Johnson referred to the shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry as Lady Nuji. Mrs. Thornberry is married to High Court Judge Sir Christopher Nuji, but has chosen to go by her maiden name. Bercow said it was inappropriate and sexist to refer to her as Lady Nuji. Johnson subsequently apologized for his inadvertent sexism. In May 2018, Johnson backed the Iran nuclear deal framework despite Donald Trump's withdrawal. Johnson opined that the deal could bring economic benefits to the Iranian people. In May 2018, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrived in the United Kingdom for a 3-day state visit. Erdogan declared that the United Kingdom is an ally and a strategic partner, but also a real friend. Liberal Democrat leader Vincent Cable denounced the visit, saying that by permitting a state visit and audience with the Queen, May, and Boris Johnson are essentially rolling out the red carpet for a man with a disregard for human rights, who is responsible for alarming oppression and violence. In June 2018, Johnson praised the North Korea, United States summit, tweeting welcome the news that President Trump and Kim Jong-un have held constructive talks in Singapore. The DPRK's commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula is an important first step towards a stable and prosperous future. In June 2018, while attending an event for EU diplomats in London, Johnson was reported to have been asked about corporate concerns over a so-called hard Brexit. In response to the question, Johnson was reported to have said "fuck business." In July 2018, 3 days after the cabinet had its meeting at Chequers to agree a Brexit strategy, Johnson, along with Brexit Secretary David Davis, resigned their posts. May named Jeremy Hunt, the long-serving Health Secretary, as Johnson's replacement. Thank you for watching this part video.